Okay, I hope that you guys missed me. I've been gone from streaming for, well, since Friday. I don't know how many days that's been. Let's call it 4 days. See, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. So, yeah, 4 days. I had a religious holiday, the holiday of Shavuot. It was a fantastic holiday, and I really did enjoy a lot of time with friends, drinking, eating a lot of fatty dairy foods, staying up all night on Saturday night, reading and hearing. These were Torah lessons. And you might think that I'm kind of yanking your chain or something, but no, I did enjoy it. I do enjoy sometimes listening to or discussing theology. And I think that if people did it a little more, we'd understand more about it, obviously, and we wouldn't be embroiled all the time in these arguments over, whether whether it's even worth it to have like a single society of everybody. And I think if people were more willing to debate theology, which is one of the more complicated subjects, other subjects would probably follow, and we'd have somewhat more of a civil debate. I also had I think 2 or 3 arguments with a liberal friend, which we'll probably discuss a different time. But you can see at the right of the screen, and there's going to be more streams the rest of the week. This week, I'm still planning on doing a lot of streaming, a lot of writing as well, a lot of stuff to do. So this article is the third in the series. What did they have to lose? And obviously, those of you that have been following the channel or following the election, even if you never did follow the channel, followed the election of Donald Trump, one of his signature lines to the black community was, "What do you have to lose?" Talking about years of democratic neglect. In this respect, we, it's used in a totally different context, in which he says, or which I ask rhetorically, who lost what in this big game over the Jerusalem embassy, over Gaza and whatever. And I made the point last time. I think I made the point, and if I didn't, it's my fault, that even people who think that Netanyahu gained out of the embassy move, they should understand that he had to give something up as well, which is the possibility that he would have to yield control of certain lands, especially neighborhoods of East Jerusalem, in a future negotiation. Maybe not as much as he would have yielded under a different president, but still something. And that's something everybody will have a different value for that. Some people would probably say, well, it actually doesn't mean shit, because some people think he doesn't deserve anything. But there's people who believe that he doesn't even deserve a country. So, what are you going to do? When I write these, it's not in order to attack. I try not to attack one side. Sometimes I have to attack, even, especially AIPAC. I do oppose AIPAC. Especially, I can't, I can't let Hamas off the hook. I can't let the failed leadership of President Abbas off the hook. And in this case, you have to look at the liberal leadership in America and look and really wonder, is there a captain at the helm? Because unfortunately, they don't have a policy that's coherent about anything, and this would be included. Now, look, I am not trying to tell them to support either side. I would say that in some cases, the best thing you can say is, vote your conscience, as Ted Cruz once said. I don't think people should be held to, support either Israel or the Palestinians. Certain senators and congressmen, I think, on the Democratic side have gravitated towards the Palestinians, but the majority of them remain largely on Israel's side. And I don't bullshit anybody. I think it is because of donor money. And that's why I do believe in overturning Citizens United. And I think AIPAC should be among the organizations whose influence is limited. And it's not because, again, I think it's a bad influence on American politics because it affects the independence of both the United States and Israel. And this comes from my viewpoint as a former Israeli soldier. I think countries should solve their issues through diplomacy and not through lobbying. And this actually gets in the way of diplomacy, just like the oil lobby, which in the past has taken the side of Saudi Arabia and other Arab states against Israel. Well, that doesn't help the Israelis. So I think that those issues, lobbying influence, whether it's the AIPAC in Congress or the oil lobby in the State Department, those for me, I oppose both, and it doesn't make me, I would say it doesn't make me antagonistic towards either side. I'm on the side of independence. But if you look at some of the people who they comment on this stuff, you get this idiot Mark Lamont Hill. I found this one, Mark Lamont Hill in the Huffington Post. This idiot who once he got really bent out of shape over this black activist's pull your pants up challenge because he said, well, it's good for people to look serious and not run around with their pants around basically around their mid thigh. That's something that police look for. That's a sign of an idiot in the neighborhood. And, as somebody who lives in that type of neighborhood, people do look, not just the white people. People look at somebody wearing their pants down as an idiot because they are morons. Because, what are you trying to, it's a very impractical way of walking around. And Mark Lamont Hill, I actually did put the link. Maybe I didn't include the link. Well, look it up. It's on Mediaite. Sorry about that. But, he published these 7 myths about the Palestinian-Israel conflict. He said one of the myths is that it's very complicated. He said, so that's a myth in his mind. It's a myth that it's very complicated. So I guess in his mind, it's super simple. He says, in a certain way, the issue is indeed complicated. After more than a century of conflict, there is definitely a lot of nuance surrounding various truth claims, policies, and solutions. Too often, however, the claim that it's complicated functions as an excuse to sidestep a very simple reality. This is about the 70-year struggle of a people who have been expelled, murdered, robbed, imprisoned, and occupied. While there is certainly a need to engage the finer points of the conflict, we can never lose sight of this basic and very uncomplicated point. No, that's not a. First of all, even if you read that very statement, the 70 years only goes for the 48 borders of Israel, because in 1967 they conquered the West Bank and Gaza. So either they've been occupied for 70 years, and therefore you say, well, Israel doesn't even have the right to exist. Or you got your math wrong, dumbass. So, Mark Lamont Hill, I think, is one of the biggest clowns in the media. And, he starts saying, here's another one. Israel has a right to exist. The claim is a product of U.S. and Israeli Hasbara, a term for propaganda. First, it's not a product of Hasbara. It's a product of the fact that it was recognized in 1948 by the U.S. and the Soviet Union as an independent country. And once you do that, there's no propaganda in the world that can say, well, they need a mulligan. They didn't really mean to recognize it. First, this argument is only rhetorically deployed in relation to Israel as opposed to Palestine or virtually any other nation states. That's not true, because a lot of people believe that Palestine has a right to exist. A lot of people. After all, no one routinely demands that Israel and its advocates declare Palestine's right to exist as an abstract idea. Well, the reason that they don't demand that is because Israel has already conceded that point. physical space or independent nation. More importantly, however, the claim obscures a more fundamental truth. No country has a right to exist. Only people do. By naturalizing the idea that nation states have a right to exist, we undermine our ability to offer a moral critique of Israel's or any settler country's origin story. It says if a country has a natural right to exist, there is less room to challenge the means by which that country obtains land, interacts with indigenous populations, or engages in international and domestic law. After all, it had a right to exist, right? The right to exist argument also reifies the nation state. He uses reify as if it makes it, reify means to make something like the king, erasing its relatively new emergence as a political imaginary construct. In other words, the idea of nations and nationalism is relatively new. This is why the whole "there was never a country called Palestine" argument is both ahistorical and dishonest. The argument also limits our ability. So he's saying, you know, there is no right for any country to exist, but if there's a right for any country to exist, it would be Palestine. That's his statement. Okay. The argument also limits our ability to imagine the world on different terms and different political formations. Yes, because we're trying to focus on the world that we have, not the fucking, you know, the world of Mark Lamont Hill, where you could walk around the neighborhood looking like an idiot with your ass hanging out, including the reconstitution of historic Palestine or contemporary Israel as a single democracy for all citizens, regardless of race, class, gender, or religion. Well, the fact is that the leadership of Palestine does not actually recognize the rights of all religious minority groups in its borders. I mean, they don't want Jew, and you know, I'm not somebody who believes in Jews going on the Temple Mount. I think that there's a religious restriction in Judaism for it, but you know, they don't believe in the right of those people to go up onto the Temple Mount anyway. They believe that it's strictly for Muslims, and anybody else can stay the fuck out, and that's it. You can check that the Haram el Sharif and you know, Al-Aqsa, they are meant for. They don't believe that the kuffar can go there. They don't believe that infidels can go there, and that's a fact. You know, they'll have them for tours, but you know, you're not allowed to pray there if you're non-Muslim, especially not if you're Jewish. So yes, there is no everything that he's accusing Israel of, which granted there are issues where, you know, they have some discrimination in Israel along religious lines mostly, that, well, the Palestinians are also guilty of. So this Mark Lamont Hill, you know, he's an idiot. He says in the previous version of this op-ed, the author stated that the beginning of the conflict could be dated to the end of the 20th century. However, he intended to write this period was around the end of the 19th century. Well, no, because the actual conflict did not start until probably, you know, the mid-20s or something. You know, it did not start in the 19th century. You know, there was under the Ottomans, in fact, the Ottoman Turks, which were a Muslim ruling class in Palestine, historical Palestine, which is a geographical region. They had no problem having Jews move in. They didn't. I don't think that they were excited to have them move in, but they allowed them to buy lands there. And let me tell you, if you apply the point of, you know, number 6 of nations not having rights to exist is ridiculous. If you look at some of these countries that have come to existence, they're not necessarily along ethnic lines. There's East Timor, for example, I think came to existence in 1999. Is based more on I think religious differences. I think that the East Timorese are Catholic, and then the rest of Indonesia is Muslim or majority Muslim. So he doesn't know what the fuck he's talking about. He just generalizes, and you know, this is a guy who he teaches a temple and he thinks his own shit doesn't stink, and that anybody who criticizes him is a white supremacist. Now back to my article. After that aside, my criticism of the right is that, you know, they cheerlead and they won't shut the fuck up about Israel and how the embassy is important, and then they have the ceremony and everything. And essentially, they're marrying the cause of Israel to defense contractors and lobbyists. So don't accuse me of taking their side in this conflict, because I have plenty to say about them. And then on the left, you have these butthurt retards who they will focus for, you know, weeks on end on what's happening between the Palestinians and the Israelis. And meanwhile, you know, who's been mentioning Nicaragua? Me. Who's been mentioning all the stuff that's been happening in terms of pharmaceutical crisis, and especially in my state of Ohio? Me, not them, not the left. Me, not the left. Who's been mentioning all of the issues with, you know, political infiltration of the left by Hillary operatives, possibly? You know, let's not assume things. It's me. It's me. It's me. It's people like me who don't want to see this, you know, this entire discussion of politics, you know, just divided like a river delta between streams of political identity groups. Okay, I am somebody, complete believer in free market capitalism, against expansion of the welfare state, for contraction of the welfare state. You know, I believe in civil liberties. I also am a non-interventionist in foreign policy. But, you know, I think Bashar Assad is a piece of shit. I'm not gonna pretend that he's the greatest thing ever. I think the guy is a total shithead. And you know, I'm not gonna support bombing him, but I'm also not gonna support supporting him. So by the same token, when I see these progressive leftists suddenly erupt in you know, consternation over the deaths of, yes, 63 people on the Gaza Strip, but they assume automatically that these are quote unquote unarmed civilians. They're not unarmed civilians, because in order to know if they're unarmed or not, you have to be able to inspect them and see who's there to inspect them. You don't know. You don't know. You have media people claiming that they are unarmed. How are you supposed to determine that? You know, you can't search them. You can't search their person for illegal weapons or lack thereof. And it's a fact that, where was this video? Expect this. You know, I mean, this is from CNN. Hamas claims 50 of its members died in Monday's clash in Gaza. So you don't like CNN? Okay, Haaretz, which is used often by the left as evidence that even Israelis don't believe in some of Netanyahu's statements. You know, they put it here that 50 people, here we go.
فيه لكن يقال أولاد الناس بروحوا بموتوا حماس تجني الثمار.
This doesn't have the subtitle. So yeah, we're going to have to find the one with the subtitle. That's funny. They made a parody of the stupid Eurovision song. Let me see here. I think this YouTube video is probably the best one. Okay, so this is from usually so this is from Paltel, which is one of the Palestinian TV broadcasters, and they broadcast this admission where he says, in the last round of confrontations, if 62 people were martyred, 50 of them were Hamas.
الجولة الأخيرة استشهد 62 شهيد.
نعم.
منهم 50 شهيد من حماس.
So that's the most simple one. And you just see this is just ignored time after time after time. People don't want to admit that Gaza is basically dominated by a dictatorial government that they're fine having people die at the hands of Israel. You don't even have to accept that Israel are good people in order to acknowledge that these were not real protests. Okay. Again, you don't have to support one side in order to criticize the other side. And I've made that argument over and over and over again. In this case, I probably would say I am more in agreement with Israel, much more in agreement with Israel than I am with the Palestinians pertaining to the exact circumstances of what happened here. Because the evidence suggests that these people were herded over and told, well, we're going to give whatever financial reward to your family or whatever for you doing whatever you're going to do, infiltrate the border, and then go and wreak havoc. And it's been said over and over again. So here's a protest that erupted. I found it interesting, not necessarily related, but it goes to illustrate what's going on the political left in the United States. This is at UCLA.
Yo, guys, this is my fucking flag.
It's my flag too, man.
I'll finish this on stuff. Alright, no.
Palestine! Free, free 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 Palestine! We want 2 states! We want 48! We don't want 2 states! We want 48! We don't want 2 states! We want 48! From the river to the sea! Palestine will be free! From the river to the sea! Palestine will be free!
So thank you, we hear you. I think one of the best things right now actually would be if we could just take a moment and understand that in this room, many of us are students.
Free, free Palestine! Protesting is not a crime! Free, free Palestine! Protesting is not a crime!
White supremacy!
White supremacy! White supremacy! White supremacy! White supremacy!
I'm not right!
White supremacy!
It's clear for all men. I'm not right!
White supremacy! White supremacy!
UCLA's police stand on the side of racism. UCLA's police stand on the side of terrorism.
So, that carnivorous plant video also looks interesting, but we're not going to watch that because this is running long already. Look, this video, it illustrates all the idiocy of people on the political left who protest crap that they really can't help with. And you see this fat, bearded hipster asshole yelling at some, cop sergeant who, I don't care about police or whatever, but exactly what point is he trying to prove? Earlier you saw a guy rip off the Armenian flag. Now, the first time I thought he was just ripping it down because he maybe he objected to the Armenian flag. I think what really happened, he might have been an Armenian guy who was like, well, don't use my ethnic group to support your cause. But the fact is that there was another Armenian guy on the panel, and he was trying to say, Armenians, Kurds, and Jews have some of the same interests. So, he was trying to say, well, I'm going to represent Armenia, and you can go fuck yourself. So that again, that is identity politics on the left, purporting to really, fight for justice. Nobody, I mean, look, what was the other chant that they were saying earlier? Fuck white supremacy, and they were doing the Debka, which is the traditional dance of a number of Arab countries, including, I guess, the Palestinians. Um, the most of the room looked like, I mean, you can see the people in the frame. They look maybe either Middle Eastern or possibly South Asian, some of them. You know, earlier there was this frame. You can see this girl looks to be, you know, maybe either Indian or Malaysian or something. And, you know, she's sitting down. She's not one of the protesters. You can see this looks like an Asian woman, you know, South Asian. I saw some Chinese girl earlier. Now, the people there are wearing, if you look at this shirt over here, this is the Revolutionary Communist Party in the U.S. They're a Maoist group, and they're basically a cult, a political cult. You know, they believe in the teachings of a guy named Bob Avakian, who is coincidentally Armenian, and you know, they're basically, they'll go anywhere and they'll protest anything, and they claim that there's an impending Maoist revolution in the United States, and that you might as well join it. So you know, they're just basically piggybacking, if you pardon the insensitive use of swine. I know that a lot of the people, you know, both the Jews and the Arabs, they don't like the pig, but they're piggybacking on the Palestine cause in order to spread Maoism, which has nothing to do with it. There could be, I mean, there's literally less commonality between Maoism and you know, a Muslim nation in the Middle East, because those of you that say, oh, the Palestinians are partially Christian, well, the people that run the Palestinian institutions on the ground, in the grassroots, they don't believe in Christianity. Okay, some of them might be Christian, but the Christian theology is so lacking in it. Maybe once in a while they'll mention that, oh, Jesus was a Palestinian. You know, they also say that a lot of people used to say that Babe Ruth was actually black. but you know, please use proof and you know, citation to substantiate your work, or else I can just laugh at you. There was no Palestinian nation in the first century AD, I guess you would call it. And you know, if he was a Palestinian, what was he doing going to the Jewish temple and throwing out the money changers? I mean, did that act of him attacking a bunch of loan officers, did that make him the first Palestinian? I wonder exactly what the hell they're talking about. But usually they'll bring up some sort of bogus argument that racially the Jews aren't the same people as the ones in the Bible or whatever. Well, you know, how long can you go and play that peekaboo of are you talking about race or are you not talking about race? You know, let's talk Turkey. Are we talking about religion or are we talking about race? Because in my book, we're talking about religions. There's no race called the Jews, despite what many people think. So I went and I divided this between, you know, the international community, the UN, and NGOs, and there's this pathetic headline in the Daily News, which, you know, I believe in freedom of speech, but it was ridiculous because they're trying to impugn, you know, Ivanka Trump, who put on a really tacky and weird, I don't know, maybe she didn't even organize it, but she was a part of it. It was a weird ceremony with some bizarre figures, bizarre religious figures, John Hagee and this other preacher and you know, a rabbi from Chabad, which was, to be honest with you, it was cringeworthy in my opinion. Stephen Mnuchin was there. I still don't trust that guy. And maybe it's because I'm not a trusting person, but that ceremony, as much as it was not enjoyable for me, it did the trick. There is an embassy there, and that was it. And she wasn't there in order to promote people getting shot for trying to crash a border fence. That was really, what does that have to do with Ivanka Trump? So you know, by the same token, if there was any hooligan violence during the football matches that have happened recently, I don't know if there were hooligan matches, last week, or if there were football matches the last week in England, but if there was any hooligan violence, then can that be blamed on the massive royal wedding that was happening there? I mean, it could, but nobody's doing it. You don't see headlines, you know, when I mean, let's see here. Let's see if we can juxtapose Prince Charles. Let's see if we can find some headlines. I mean, there's a lot of tabloid football hooligan. Has that ever been done? Because there's, I mean, you got, well, I mean, there's some funny ones with him. But you never see him. I mean, there's football hooliganism all the time in England, but you never see Prince Charles blamed for it. You know, even though the guy's a fucking weirdo of the highest order, and you know, I think once he becomes king, people will just be waiting for him to die. People will probably wonder why they didn't cryogenically freeze Queen Elizabeth so that, and you know, have the title passed to somebody else. Anybody but Prince Charles is just one of the weirdest people ever. Never ever blamed for anything that bad that goes on in Britain ever. I mean, he does get blamed for all of his weird crap, but I mean, that's to be expected. I mean, that's what I mean, Chris Rock would say, yeah, you're supposed to get blamed for the shit you do. What, you want, a cookie? So, yeah, this was, for the international community, was a lot of posturing and virtue signaling. You know, Iran issued a condemnation, of course, calling it a day of shame. The UN condemned it and said that he wants the Secretary General Antonio Guterres wants a peaceful resolution. The European Union couldn't get a unanimous vote, so they couldn't condemn it as a unit, which is kind of funny because typically they hate. Typically the EU does take the side of the Palestinians. You know, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I'm not going to pretend that I don't see the bias of certain countries towards Palestinians. You know, just like, I mean, I'll admit the U.S. is biased towards Israel. I would say the European Union and almost every other country in the world is biased the other way. And that's one of the reasons that Palestinian activists claim that, oh, it's only the U.S. that allows Israel to get away with it. So then maybe admit the rest of the world is biased against Israel. You know, well, why should China get a free pass all the time? It puts fucking millions of people in prison. Let me show this one. This is from, I think it was either Reuters or, yeah, here we go. 120,000 Uyghurs or Uyghurs, not Uyghurs, not Cenk Uyghur. This is from Foreign Policy magazine. Now, I'm not going to say people don't write about it, but nobody gives a shit. They have a Muslim gulag in China, Western China. So people are like, oh, what do you mean you're going to... I guess I reached the article limit, but believe me, it's here on Foreign Policy magazine, which is a shitty magazine anyway. But they do. There's hundreds of thousands of people in a fucking gulag in Western China. It says Muslims forced to eat pork and drink alcohol at Chinese camps. Now, some of you might say, well, I mean, you know, I mean, it's not the word. I mean, some people in America would be like, hey, free pork. I can't eat pork. But, you know, some people would say, oh, this is a life. Not these people. They're forced to carry the communist flag. So, no, I mean, there's a clear difference in the treatment of these two groups. You know, on the one hand, you have the Israelis who have given Gaza over to the Hamas, and then they do impose, you know, what they call a blockade, but they allow humanitarian aid to go in, and then what does Hamas do? They burn the fucking what do you call it? The depot, the supply depot. They burn it up. They did that, I think, 2 weeks ago. And then, well, who do they blame? The Israelis. So no, when I see bullshit on one side, when I see, defense contractors saying, "Oh, let's give more aid, foreign aid to Israel," I say, I'm not going to support that. I'm not going to support these assholes on the other side they'll make excuse after excuse after excuse. And what was the real price paid here? Well, in reality, Al Jazeera, they published this article that conveniently showed that no, most of the world does not give a fuck about this. It is really a very small issue having an embassy in one city or another, especially in on land that, it's debatable whether anybody should care who it belongs to. It was, by the way, under UN control until 1967. So, what do you want them to do? Just leave the foosball table there and have a rec center or something and pretend there's nothing productive to do with it. So all these countries that sent delegations, the majority of them are, you see third world African nations here, like Kenya and South Sudan. By the way, if Mark Lamont Hill has a problem with, he says, oh, nations don't have a right to exist. Well, South Sudan fought for, I think it was over 30 years against the Arab rest of Sudan to get their independence. They were massacred like time after time, and because they were not Muslim. And they got their independence, and now they're allies with the Israelis, so to speak, on a number, on not every issue, but probably a number of issues. You have the Congo, both of them. So they have both Congos, had people at the ceremony. Angola, which during this Cold War was actually a Soviet supporter. And it's the same government. You have Vietnam. And then you have most of the other countries were like from Latin America and Eastern Europe. So what this really indicates, it has nothing to do with Israel being a country that is an apartheid state or whatever. Because if it were, then why are all these African countries sending people as delegates to the ceremony? Not that I think the ceremony was the greatest thing in the world. Like I said, I thought the ceremony was dumb. But Al Jazeera, by virtue of featuring this stupid map, they show that there's a lot of people, a lot of countries around the world that accepted that this isn't that big of a deal. You have Georgia and Ukraine, in Eastern Europe. And I think, to be honest with you, I think if Putin was not commercially linked to Iran, I think he wouldn't have had a problem sending a delegate. I think some of these countries in Central Asia, they don't necessarily have a problem with what's going on, and that's why the response hasn't been as, people think that the response has been huge. This is nothing compared to responses around the world to previous events. When I was living in Israel, when I was in the army there, what happened last week was not very significant compared to things that happened when I was in the army there. It's just not. In terms of international reactions, in terms of casualty numbers, no. There were a lot of people who died as a result of their poor decision making. And, that's about it for the international community. And then you have the Democrats, led by Chuck Schumer. Now that's another matter. I'm going to try to move through the rest of these subcategories a little faster. The Democrats, they're in a little bit of a dilemma because they don't have a united vision on this, and they're not going to. It's not going to be easy to reconcile different wings of the party on this. And I don't know if any side is more to blame for. I would say it is the corporate lobbyists. They have more to blame for this than others, because the prevailing logic had been among Israel supporters that you didn't need both parties. They wanted a consensus among both parties in support of Israel. Now, for many years that did make some sense. The fact of the matter is that the actual politics, the actual beliefs of the Democratic Party are drifting away from a point where they can actually make the case that they support Israel, because they support international chaos, basically, the Democrats. How many times have they supported, basically movements that are to the detriment of their own citizens. You know, the Democratic Party has supported NAFTA, which is against the interests of the people of Mexico, Canada, and the United States. The Democratic Party and the Republican Party, by the way, also supported NAFTA for many years, but they've kind of fallen off of it thanks to Trump. The Democratic Party supported, you know, a lot of these big financial bailouts of investment banks, which is not just a policy in the U.S. but of other nations too. Including, I think the British government. I remember most vividly I think they did bail out the Royal Bank of Scotland, which was in massive debt. So this belief in serving corporate masters over the actual citizens is a hallmark of the neoliberal left. And I hate using the term neoliberal, but it's true. You know, these are the Krugmanites, and you know, this is not consistent. But believe it or not, you can dispute this. This is not the policy of the Israeli government under Netanyahu, at least, but maybe under the previous Prime Minister Olmert or you know, a couple other ones. There was a stroke of truth to that, but by and large, the Israelis are not for you know, a lot of them are against the increased strength of supranational bodies like the European Union. You know, I think, and you know, maybe I'm wrong. I would say that if they are, they're fucked in the head. The power of the EU is of no help to the Israelis because the EU has consistently worked in conflict to the interests of the Israeli government and in favor of the Palestinians. You know, but again, I'm digressing. So in the Democratic Party, you have the traditional centrist wing, the type that, you know, they're corporate liberals that, you know, they'll talk a lot about a more tolerant society. You'll have Schumer. In the background here, you have Jeff Merkley, who's not really related to this topic. Well, then you have Bernie Sanders here, who, you know, he was certainly somebody who was very critical of Israel during the 2016 election. And it's gone from, in 1996 or 1995, when the act approving the move of the embassy to Jerusalem was first passed, the only Democrat to vote against it, and there were 4 Republicans who voted against it, including one who was a Lebanese American, but the only Democrat to vote against it was the former KKK Grand Wizard of West Virginia. I think it was a Grand Wizard. Maybe it was a Grand Dragon. It doesn't matter. He's fucking dead, so I don't care. I'm not from West Virginia. But yeah, he was the only Democrat to vote against it. Everybody else voted for it, even though it was the initiative of Senate Majority Leader Bob Dole, who was, you know, he was probably gunning for election the next year. And President Clinton signed it. So you did have a Democratic and Republican consensus in the 90s to do this. And it kept being reiterated, you know, under Bush and under Obama, and they were kicking the can down the road. And I think what the, you know, and this has been something I've read in several places. The reason that they never actually executed the move was because most administrations did not really believe in the spirit of the law. They wanted to kind of, you know, flash their peacock feathers for AIPAC to get that donor money. And then eventually they wanted, in a final status agreement, they wanted the city divided, and they were perfectly willing to see, you know, the Israelis give the eastern half to the Palestinians in a future Palestinian state. Unfortunately for them, those negotiations never bore fruit. The Palestinians rejected every Israeli offer because the Israelis won't accept the right of return. So even those Israelis that have accepted the concession of East Jerusalem back to the Palestinians in a future final status agreement, they won't buckle over the right of return, because that would effectively mean the end of Israel as a coherent state, because all of these descendants of people who left Israel in 1948, whether you think that they were expelled or you think that they left of their own accord, they would come back and they would dissolve the country. They would begin to undermine it, and they say that's the objective. Everybody knows that the right of return, even for most pro-peace Israelis, is the red line. They won't go past it. There's some exceptions, but they don't have any real power. And, I go through the whole conflict between Clinton and Sanders in the 2016 election. And Sanders put 3, explicitly pro-Palestinian people on his platform delegation. There's a delegation of the platform committee in 2016, and he appointed 3 pro-Palestine people: Keith Ellison, James Zogby, and Cornel West. Ellison, of course, you know him from the FARC on feminism videos if you watch this series. The series on this channel. James Zogby is the founder and president of the Arab American Institute, and he's a huge pro-Palestine activist since the early 80s, by the way. I'm not going to talk any more about him. I mean, he's entitled to his opinion. I think he's wrong, but he certainly he's allowed to use his money and his influence the same way that AIPAC does. That's the fairness of this system. That if you think AIPAC is a place in the American political discourse, you can't say that James Zogby doesn't. As much as you might I do disagree with his point of view as well. Then you have Dr. Cornel West. A lot of you might know him anyway. Interesting lecturer. He does have balls like fucking boulders. The guy is like, he will talk shit to anybody. And he really lays down the line. I also don't agree with him on almost anything, but he's one of the ultimate shit talkers of all time. And for that, I do have to give at least respect. This divided the party. The party, first of all, Cornel West did not endorse Hillary Clinton in the end. He said, well, this is a charade. I'm going to support. He ended up supporting Jill Stein and the Green Party. And it's become a fault line. On the one side, you have the centrist Democrats, people represented often by Alan Dershowitz, who's increasingly losing his place in the Democratic Party because he appears on Fox News and he's always defending Trump against the Russiagate bullshit, which I didn't get to cover today because I was writing this and filming this video. So, you have Dershowitz and some people like him arguing on Israel's side. Then you have Cynthia Nixon, who is apparently, I don't think she's a total follower of the boycott, divestment, and sanction movement, but she refused to appear in one of the Israeli settlement cities of Ariel. There's a division. Candidates are divided on this topic. It's a fact. You can't deny that there is a division in the Democratic Party, and part of the division is this issue. I wouldn't say the entire issue is Israel and Palestine, but it does form part of the whole rift. Then you have the progressive street. There's Linda Sarsour. She stated in an interview in The Nation in March 2017 that Zionism and feminism are incompatible. February 2018, she attacked Chuck Schumer, saying that she was tired of a white man negotiating on her behalf. Frankly, I think that's probably the way many people feel about Chuck Schumer, regardless of the fact of whether he's white or not. I think it's a dumb reason to say he's an idiot, but he is an idiot. So, you do have to grant that to Linda Sarsour. But then you do have people who, I misspelled street here, but you do have a lot of this issue of the protest movement needs to constantly feed itself on outrage, and they started with, the march of the Women's March and the Women's Strike, which, it did have a large following in numbers initially, but it's kind of petered off. So they've had to rejuvenate their ranks. There was the Me Too in the fall and then there was the Parkland shooting, and after that kind of lost the interest of almost everybody. You had them use this March for, well, did I already say March for Our Lives? Well, now they've started using this Starbucks bullshit, which to be honest with you, I don't think anybody cares enough about Starbucks to actually mount massive marches. I've seen them mob Starbucks locations. But do you notice something alongside all of that stuff? They didn't get together to march in favor of Gaza during any of these events. I mean, they did a few marches and events, but they weren't like mass events like what happened in Washington last year. And people don't really care, and they're increasingly ignoring this stuff as pathetic juvenile histrionics. And then you have the media. This assessment kind of dovetails with the whole thing. The legacy media is falling apart. A lot. I mean, I've said a lot of the same stuff. Plenty of commentators have said the same thing. From Lionel to Styx Hexenhammer to Tim Pool. You have Anthony Logan saying the same thing. You can't. It's harder to find a YouTuber that thinks that the legacy media is intact today. Even TYT, I would say, would know that the legacy media is falling apart. And then partly it's because of the variety here. There's all these groups, Telesur, Press TV, Al Jazeera, and RT America. They're on the Palestine side, and then the Israelis also have their side. So you could watch those feeds on YouTube or Facebook or whatever. You don't necessarily have to watch network TV anymore in the U.S. So MSNBC, CNN, and Fox News, they still have the largest balance of the viewers, but it's a smaller balance, and it's just growing smaller and smaller. And I actually cite a Pew survey regarding this where people they're using it much less. I found here we go. 2016 Pew Research study showed that Americans in younger demographics increasingly do not use TV to receive their news, with only 27% of those aged 18 to 29 choosing it, and an even more paltry 5% using print media. And then finally, I go through the Jewish left, which I think is a joke increasingly, especially these dumbasses at the ADL. You have John Greenblatt, who looks basically like an alien villain, and he's an embarrassment. The whole Jewish left is an embarrassment, whether it's the Zionist Jewish left or the non-Zionist Jewish left. They don't have anything that they're supporting. You had Bill Maher. He had this video a couple years ago. I'm a little tired, so if you want to watch the video, just go to my link, and it's on there. I'm not going to play it now, but there's more and more Jews who are leaving the left, or at least the activist left, and they're saying, we're done with this. Sometimes things happen that have nothing to do with us. We get blamed for it. Sometimes we don't feel comfortable with crap that happens in Israel, but, we get excessively blamed for it. You had people, again, I don't know how many times I've talked about it. I think at least 2 or 3 times. There were the 2 women, these Jewish lesbians, kicked out of the 2017 Dyke March. And that was pretty funny. But it showed that there is no intersectionality is bullshit. It'll get you, it'll get you in, but it won't let you stay. So they were kicked out. There's also a grassroots intimidation campaign in the UK Labour Party, which is not American. So, I just threw it in there for context. The world left is increasingly inhospitable towards Jewish members. So the Jewish left is evaporating, or it's becoming isolated. So I conclude on this. Moreover, now that Trump's positions on the Israel-Palestine conflict appears to be resolutely in favor of Israel's side, the perception of many of his opponents within the Jewish community will be of people that simply have no hope of being pleased, or that in reality their hatred of him is too visceral to be addressed by a reasoned argument. And I really think that. There's some people that'll never be satisfied. That's why I think, it's better that he's focusing on Korea. It's better he's focusing on jobs in the United States. I hope that for the rest of his term until 2020, he does the minimum possible to focus on Israel, Palestine, and the rest of the Middle East. He basically says, if don't even bother me with this crap, unless something serious happens where, our troops are in danger there, partially because we have them there in the first place to protect these countries that don't give a fuck about us, like Qatar. I think that it's a thankless job. And, I would say, thank you, Trump, for doing things that people didn't think you had the courage to do. But I think you've done enough, and you can go focus on things that are more important. And yeah, that's about it for this whole topic. Maybe we'll revisit it if somebody's interested, but I think that's all I have to say.